All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another organic week for painting. This week, we're going to focus on a very simple subject to give us the opportunity to be a little bit more designerly. So, what that means is we're going to be focusing on rocks, particularly this week. But we are going to do it in such a way that in part 3 of this week, we're going to try and now stylize rocks, but not necessarily in rendering, but more in shape. So it's more of a fun design assignment. Now, the way we're going to do it is we're going to start off part 1 by picking at least 5 different rock references from the library. So these need to be real life references, not from artists. We'll do that in part 2. And the way you're going to study these rocks is by painting each rock with only 4 values, right? So you're going to pick 4 values. Again, preferably a little bit in a wider range of values. So meaning that you pick 2 dark values, 2 light values, or you pick 1 very dark value, a light value, and 2 mid-ranged values, but they should be widespread apart. And then you're going to repaint the same rock with different proportions and 4 values. So what that basically means is that you're going to use all of the value information that you got out of that reference copy, and now you're going to change the proportions of the rock slightly and repaint it a little bit from imagination, okay? All right, so if we have any other people joining in, then that's fine, but I'm just gonna start. So in this classroom, we are going to primarily focus on composition, but just for the assignment of day 2, I did wanted to give you guys some pointers on how you can handle the assignment better, to, just to learn more efficiently and get a better result. So for the first part here, we're going to be talking a little bit about shadow mapping. Not too much, but just a little bit. As you can see right now, I'm doing this digitally for a change, by the way, because it's just easier for me to show all the steps, especially when it comes to composition. But for this rock, for instance, that I did for the assignment that you saw on the video of this week, basically I do a certain process that I follow in order to enable myself to get the best possible result for that study, and also not only practice, learning how to draw a rock or the subject at hand, but also learning how to increase my shadow mapping, my design sense, and my lighting sense, right? So for this rock, for instance, I didn't find the reference photo anymore, but it's okay. It's just a rock, right? And I was looking at a rock and it was lit from this side, right? Like that. And so when I see that, that's the first thing that I'm looking for. When I look at the subject at hand, when you guys are looking at, the mountains that you have to do, or the rocks, or the trees, or whatever, first determine where the light is coming from, okay? And the kind of simple object that you're drawing. In this case, that's the reason why I made you guys in day 1 draw so many boxes, is because basically rocks are some sort of boxes with a lot of planes cut off, right? Or added to them. So I established my lighting source, and then I start establishing where I think all the shadows will be hitting. So all the planes that I believe will be in shadow, and I can determine this off of my reference photo. So the reference photo that you'll be using, try to really make it clear for yourself where the shadow planes are going to be. So in the rock that I was doing, I was seeing my entire shadow area being something like this. Right. And notice that and this comes to having a good sense of design, notice that my shadow shapes aren't fragmented. They might be fragmented in the reference photo, but as designers, as illustrators, we try to make things as aesthetically pleasing as possible. So shadow grouping, that's also a term, is very common amongst just illustrators and artists, because it makes for a better read in your composition. So this is the shadow group that I have established. And if we look at how I shaded it, right, you can instantly recognize a three-dimensional plane. So as soon as you fill in your shadow shape and you did it successfully, basically most of your work is done here. Okay, then it just comes to rendering. But having a good design shape for your shadow shapes and your light shapes it's almost like 80% of the work. The rest is just rendering, right? So as you can see, I only did this in a couple of layers, and normally I would even do it on one layer, but just for demonstration purposes, I did it on a couple of layers. And then as soon as I establish my shadow map, and if you have a hard time understanding what shadow map is, please check out the shading tutorials on the website, as well as the charcoal portrait tutorial that I have on the exclusive tutorial sections, because I talk a lot more in depth about shadow mapping there. Okay, and then so for my layer 2, I basically transform that graphic looking posterized image of a rock, and I soften it up and make it look more realistic. Again, at all times, I'm thinking about the basic fundamental features of light and shadow, right? So I'm considering my core shadows, I'm considering my ambient occlusion, I'm considering my bounce light, and I'm considering my halftones. That doesn't change whether I'm looking at a portrait, a rock, a tree, a mountain, whatever, right? Usually the rules of light stay exactly the same. Sometimes, depending on the kind of material that it's being cast on, that might change, right? Especially if you have very translucent elements like gems or, like insect skin, something that is very translucent. Some of those rules might change, but other than that, usually when you have solid objects, it stays the same. The rules of light stay the same. Try to find your core shadows, try to find your shadow shape, try to find your bounce lights and your halftones. If you can do that successfully, you will almost always end up with a nice looking picture, okay? And then it just comes to adding maybe a bit more detail, because the rock that I was looking at had some grass on top of it. So I tried to indicate that with the values that I'm doing here. Again, it's important, and that's what I tell you in the video as well. Try to do this in grayscale. The reason that you need to do this in grayscale is to really focus on the values and get a good and realistic read of the objects that you're studying with values alone. Adding color later, that's the easy part. Trust me, it's getting that good grasp on values, which is important, right? And that's just what I wanted to have you take away from this lecture about shadow mapping. Now, when we look at the cloud that I did, it's even easier for a cloud and maybe a bit harder for a lot of you, because with a cloud you actually... All right, thank you all for watching. If you've enjoyed this clip and you want to get access to part 2 and part 3 of these assignments, make sure you head over to Art-Wod.com, where we have a lot more of this content, along with classrooms to accompany each of these assignment cycles, tutorials, a complete beginner's course for you to enjoy and get you up and running with the program. We have an amazing community on Discord where I'm very active. We have some great support teachers. So if you want to get access to all of that, make sure you visit Art-Wod.com, and I will see you there.